Welcome back, March 12th, 2021. Glenn Harlan Reynolds is a professor of law at the University of Tennessee and writes the following, which I agree with in whole. Most Americans hate woke politics, and most minorities don't share woke priorities. Indeed, according to pollster David Shore, woke excesses are causing black voters to flee the Democratic Party. Despite endless charges of racism, former President Donald Trump took the biggest share of minority voters of any Republican in my lifetime. Woke tyrants ride high, even so. According to a Cato YouGov poll, 62% of Americans self-censor their political expression. Only a tiny minority of consumers care about Mr. Potato Head's toxic masculinity, about Aunt Jemima as a brand, or about Me Too aggressions of Pepe Le Pew. Yet corporations, universities, and governments rush to placate the minuscule slice of the population, trashing large chunks of our culture in the process. It's happening not because anybody voted for it, but because a small but determined and vicious minority is bullying people to go along, relying on cowardice and groupthink to achieve ends that could never happen via majority vote. How do you think Dr. Seuss would have done in a referendum? 90 to 10, maybe? How does this happen? To some degree, the woke abuse the good nature of Americans. For the most part, Americans want their fellow citizens to be happy. If they hear something makes others unhappy, they generally look to change things. And there's fear. Writing about the goings-on at New York's Dalton School, Barry Weiss notes that even parents who think the political correctness has gone too far are afraid to speak out. They think their kids' shot at the Ivy League could be at risk. And it's not just at private schools like Dalton. Weiss quotes one mother, quote, "I look at the public school and I'm equally mortified. I can't believe that what they are doing to everybody. I'm afraid. I'm afraid to speak too loudly. I feel cowardly, so I just make little waves." Another mother says, "It's fear of retribution. Would it cause our daughter to be ostracized? Would it cause people to ostracize us? It already has." In his book, Skin in the Game, Nicholas Nassim Taleb writes about the surprising ability of small but intransigent minorities. 3 or 4% is enough who can change the entire direction of a society. He writes, quote, "The most intolerant wins. Yes, an intolerant minority can control and destroy democracy. It will eventually destroy our world. So we need to be more than intolerant with some intolerant minorities." Does this mean we should be less tolerant of our own majoritarian tyrants or minoritarian tyrants? In a world, maybe. I don't mean that they should be forced into camps or even driven from their jobs and from polite society, as the woke are all too willing to do to their opponents, but they need to be deprived of the thing that is most important to their self-image, and that is moral credibility. The woke think of themselves and want everyone to think of them as deeply moral. If they have a flaw, it's that they care just a little too much. They're too idealistic, too empathetic, too eager to make the world a better place. That's baloney. If you look at what they do rather than what they say about themselves, it quickly becomes obvious that the woke are horrible, awful people, and they should be treated as such and reminded of this whenever they raise their head. Historically, it's not the good guys who are out burning books and censoring speech. It isn't the caring, empathetic people who try to destroy lives based on something said years ago, often while young, often taken out of context. It isn't the good guys who take undisguised glee at the ruining of lives, families, and careers. You know who does these things? Horrible, awful people do these things. Selfish people. People with serious mental and emotional problems who seek some sort of vindication for the deficient characters by taking power trips while imposing sufferings on others. Treat these tyrants as what they are. Awful people who shouldn't be listened to and who need to work hard on joining the better half of the human race. And remind them of it over and over because it's true. Deep down, they know it too. Well said, Glenn. I think the winner of that position this week, who needs to be told she's an awful person or at least deeply wrong, might be Meghan Markle and Harry. I've been trying to wrap my head around why they were such a big deal in this country, and it's not just because of Oprah. If Diane Sawyer, say, did the interview, I think you'd get the same attention, reaction, and response. Though it would have had better follow-ups during the interview because Sawyer would have shown more incredulity at some of the absurd claims Meghan made rather than just accept and swallow them whole as Oprah did. Then again, Diane wouldn't have been paid $7 million to do the interview. My first thought about all the promotion for the interview is, aren't we Americans? We don't do kings and princes and queens and princesses here, outside of fairy tales and cartoons, do we? We don't, in other words, take blood seriously here, do we? We, of course, being the first country in the history of the world being founded not on the divine right of kings, bloodlines, or theological parochialism, and founded as against something known as the British Crown, royalty, bloodlines, the divine rights of kings. I can't prove this, but I bet it's true. More Americans probably venerate the British royalty or parts of it than any Brits think about, venerate, celebrate, or give two hoots about the American president or his family. You think Don Jr., Hunter Biden, Amy Carter, Jenna Bush, or Sasha Obama would get anything like 10% of the attention on a British television interview that Meghan got or can get anytime she wants here in America? So what's going on here? Well, one is we've forgotten ourselves and why we disdained bloodlines. It's easy to do when you discount, nay, destroy all original understandings of our founding. Second, there's an unarticulated new fascination with blood and bloodlines here in America. And to me, it's as sick as the mythical hospital patient who refuses a blood transfusion from someone of a different race. But that's where we are now. As recently as the decade I was born to now has been a total transmogrification of this once supremely ethical and foundational understanding that blood and race should not matter. The founder or inventor of the word woke in the 1960s, William Melvin Kelly, used that word to describe how black Americans wanted nothing more than to be part of mainstream life, not identified as different because of their race, but similar or the same by virtue of being a fellow American. Beautiful. Martin Luther King wanted to achieve a society that would find race irrelevant and the only relevant thing about an individual being his or her humanhood. The view of John Marshall Harlan, Justice of the Supreme Court, that our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens, was the view progressive, smart, open-minded, non-racist people took from Plessy v. Ferguson, as it was the dissent. It was the same view Thurgood Marshall had when he argued to the Supreme Court in the famous Brown versus Board of Education case, quote, "Distinctions by race are so evil, so arbitrary and invidious that a state bound to defend the equal protections of the laws must not invoke them in any public sphere," close quote. That was then. Now, race matters. Now, too many think racial minorities should not be part of, but separate from, majoritarian or even mainstream life, indeed identified as different by dint of their race. Now, race is supposed to be not only relevant, but perhaps the most relevant thing in public and private life, not simple humanhood. Now we are taught the virtues of Plessy versus Ferguson as historically and morally right, and not its dissent, and that our Constitution was not colorblind, and both tolerated and endorsed classes among citizens. Now we are taught and told distinctions by race are important, deliberate, and definitive, and that we should be bound to respect them in every part of the public sphere. The opposite of everything we thought we learned and we thought was right. The opposite of Thurgood Marshall and John Marshall Harlan and Martin Luther King. Meghan Markle as Oprah Winfrey, play these tunes to a fairly well to perfection. Both millionaires and billionaires exist as if to explain the ongoing unfairness of their societies and lives. Though both grew up in those same societies, in one case, middle class, to become a member of the royal family. In the other case, so dirt poor she wore dresses made of potato sacks as a child, but is now the wealthiest individual woman in the world. Yes, very unfair societies. It's a bit hard to take and swallow, but given the downgraded state of education, common sense, and understandings of our, not to mention other societies, I can see why we, or many of us, take all this seriously and take it all as important, these complaints of Meghan and Oprah, as we take it all as instructive and oh so elevated and oh so sophisticated and oh so woke. Peggy Noonan writes today, quote, "Why should an American care about any of these interviews? I suppose we shouldn't. In a practical way, we're interested in the royal family because we don't have one, don't want one, and yet think it's great that others do," close quote. That may used to have been true, but doesn't quite get the entire Markle Winfrey spectacle of misery and sadness. Poor little rich girls that they are. As I understand the original story of the poor little rich girl, there may be something there, for in that play, Gwendolyn, the protagonist, also succumbs to delirium and a world of imagination. Poor little countries succumb to an accepting of too much delirium. Restlessness, illusions, and incoherence of thought and speech are what delirium is. We should not be saying, "God save the Queen." We should rather be saying, "God save America." I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.